"Your sister's not in a coma," murmured the black nurse. And the millionaire walked into the ICU with a hidden recorder. The metal sign of the hospital reflected Boston's gray sky. St. August Private Medical Center, the place where his parents had died decades ago. The hospital had been renovated, its facades modernized, the halls silenced by cutting-edge technology. But Eliot knew, behind the tempered glass and digital sensors, the past still whispered. He was greeted by a young receptionist who, upon seeing the last name Dawson on the badge he placed on the counter, immediately straightened her posture. "Miss Vivian Dawson, yes, sir? She's in the intensive care unit, room 9. The chief physician requested you be taken directly." Eliot nodded. Hard eyes. He didn't ask questions. He just moved forward. Along the way, the hospital's white, sterile corridors seemed to narrow, as if time itself was pulling back with him. Still life paintings decorated the walls. The smell of antiseptic, echoing footsteps, a flash of memory. Vivian running through that same corridor, small, screaming for help. But he brushed the memory aside like someone swiping away a bothersome phone notification. At the end of the hall, just before entering the restricted wing, a black woman in a white uniform suddenly appeared beside him, hair tied in a bun, skin marked by subtle wrinkles, steady eyes, like someone who had seen more than she should. Without even looking at him directly, she murmured as she passed, almost as if speaking to herself, "Your sister is not in a coma, Mr. Dawson." Eliot stopped. It was said so softly, so quickly, that he almost thought he imagined it. He turned, facing the nurse. "What did you say?" She had already turned the corner, walking away with calm steps as if nothing had happened. An orderly was pushing a gurney and blocked his view. By the time he managed to get around it, she had vanished into the maze of corridors and automatic doors. For a moment, Eliot just stood there, his eyes fixed in the direction she had disappeared. The air seemed heavier, not because of the hospital, but because of her voice, a tone filled with certainty. It didn't feel like a joke, and no one would dare joke with a Dawson. He entered the ICU wing with a clenched jaw. Room 9. Vivian. There she was, lying still, pale as a wax statue. She had the same soft features from her youth, but her face now carried the weight of decades. Tubes came out her nose. Monitors blinked with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. Eliot approached slowly. Her hand lay on the sheet, far too relaxed, far too clean, without the expected muscle stiffness of someone in a coma for days. No signs of bed sores or atrophy. Her eyes, beneath closed lids, seemed active. There was tension in the muscles around them. "Vivian," he murmured. Nothing. No reaction. But Eliot was trained to read subtleties. He had built an empire reading the faces of investors, catching lies, detecting weaknesses. And there, in front of his sister, he saw something he couldn't name. Something off script. "Still pretending, huh?" he said in a low, almost ironic tone, trying to break his own discomfort. The monitor kept its rhythm, but Eliot noticed her breathing had shifted slightly. It was more controlled, more conscious. He settled into the chair beside her, watched for over an hour, waiting, testing. At one point, he whispered, "You know I never want to come back here. You know that, don't you?" And at that very moment, a single tear slowly rolled down the side of Vivian's eye. He held his breath. The monitor didn't register any heart change. No alarm, no change in readings. But the tear was there, glistening on her cheek like a silent confession. Eliot stood up abruptly, leaving the room with quick steps. Outside, by the ICU's front desk, the same nurse was back, now calmly organizing medical charts. Without looking at him, she murmured, "Sometimes one must sleep so another can awaken." Eliot stared at her. For the first time, his eyes lost their firmness. The nurse looked back, serious. "Are you ready to listen, Mr. Dawson?" That night, Eliot Dawson didn't sleep. He was back in his penthouse on the top floor of the Four Seasons, sitting at a glass table covered in medical papers, hospital staff names, partial records, incomplete reports, and the photograph that disturbed him most, Vivian, intubated, eyes closed, monitor in the background. But the image that wouldn't leave his mind was a tear, sliding down with surgical precision, as if it had been rehearsed, as if it were a message. Vivian was an actress, after all, always had been. Theater in her teens, film school courses, that uncontrollable passion for tragic narratives. After their parents died, she vanished from the media. She isolated herself, stopped answering calls. And Eliot didn't go after her. Now she reappeared in a coma, but something didn't add up. The next morning, he returned to the hospital. This time, he wore a light gray suit casual and carried a small digital recorder hidden in the inside pocket of his blazer, as light as a credit card, a device used to record meetings with CEOs and foreign ministers, now aimed at the one person he had never been able to decipher. Upon arrival, the same nurse, Lorraine, was on duty at the end of the hallway. She said nothing, just watched Eliot from a distance with the same steady eyes, as if she already knew what he was going to do. Eliot entered Vivian's room unannounced. The silence was absolute. The heart monitor beeped rhythmically, blending with the hum of the air conditioner and the whisper of life support machines. The sound of simulated death. He approached the bed, took off his blazer, and laid it carefully folded on the armchair beside her. Pocket facing up, microphone aimed at the bed. "Good morning, dear sister," he said with controlled sarcasm. "I decided to come back. Again." Silence. He stood, hands in his pockets, studied her eyes. They didn't move, but there were micro-tensions in her forehead muscles. Breathing too steady. "You know, it was quite the surprise getting that call. Your sister had an accident. She's in a coma. Come immediately." He chuckled without humor. Poetic, almost, just the way you like it. Eliot took a few slow steps across the room, stopped by the window, opened the blinds slightly, letting the light fall directly on Vivian's face. No reaction, but her chin trembled, almost imperceptibly. He continued, "But you know what I found most curious? The timing. After so long. After all these years of silence. You waited until now to lure me." And then he tested. "You always were a good actress." Silence. But he saw it, clearly. A muscle in her cheek twitched. The fingers on her left hand moved a millimeter. Small signs. But for Eliot, it was like hearing a shouted confession. He approached the bed, looked directly at her. "So you were listening." Her breathing changed. "All right, want to play? Let's play, Vivian. But this time, I'm recording everything." At that moment, Lorraine entered the room quietly with a clipboard. She saw Eliot standing by the bed, noticed the blazer oddly placed. Her eyes blinked slowly, as if reading the entire subtext of the scene in a single glance. "Is everything all right, Mr. Dawson?" Eliot replied without looking. "I believe so. My sister and I are catching up." Lorraine walked closer, gently adjusted the sheet over Vivian, performing the task with reverent care. But as she leaned in, she whispered almost inaudibly, "Be careful what you ask for, sir. She only wants you to see." Eliot turned suddenly. "See what?" But Lorraine was already facing away, signing something on the clipboard. She looked over her shoulder and whispered, "What you forgot." She left the room. Eliot stood there, feeling the blood rush to his temples. The recorder was picking up everything. But what if she never spoke? What if that calculated silence was just a trick? A performance? A punishment? He sat down in the armchair, looked at his sister for long minutes. That face, still so similar to their childhood. Vivian, always the more sensitive one. More dramatic, always closer to their parents. And him? He drifted away. Always did. But now, why? What did she want him to see? The question haunted him for the rest of the day. Later, back in the apartment, Eliot transferred the audio to his computer, played it at full volume, wearing headphones, ran the sound through analysis software he used to detect micro-expressions in confidential meetings. Silence. Beep. His voice. More silence. But then, deep in the background, there was a whisper, inaudible to the common ear. But there, he raised the volume, replayed, filtered frequencies. "You left me there? Eliot, He froze. It was her voice. Low, weak, but alive, clear, directed at him. A chill ran down his spine. The ground shifted beneath him. It was impossible. She was sedated, in a coma, under 24-hour monitoring. Or she wasn't. This wasn't revenge. It was something far worse. A calling, an invitation to the abyss. And for the first time in years, Eliot was afraid to remember. The morning was heavy with a dense silence, the kind that only old memories can bring. Eliot didn't go to the office. He sat at the kitchen table of his luxurious apartment, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Vivian's voice, whispered ghostly, still echoed in his headphones, played on repeat through the night. You left me there, Eliot. That phrase carried weight. It wasn't an accusation. It was a reminder, and there was something about it that paralyzed him. He didn't know what she was talking about. He grabbed a cigarette, lit it with trembling hands, even though he hadn't smoked in years. In the background, the TV ran financial news, but it was just noise. Eliot's mind was elsewhere, somewhere he had avoided for decades. The lake house. That's where everything had started and ended. He hadn't set foot there since the summer of 1999. Vivian was 17, he was 18. Their parents had bought the house as a weekend retreat, surrounded by pines, with a deck that opened onto a calm lake. A beautiful, secluded house, full of childhood laughter. But the summer their parents died, everything disappeared. Officially, it was a car accident, skidding on a wet road. Both died instantly. Vivian was hospitalized for a shock. Eliot, according to the records, had been sleeping at home in the city. He had alibis, witnesses. But then why did that voice whisper, you left me there? 3 hours later, Eliot was driving alone along the winding road that led to the old Dawson house. The rural landscape of Massachusetts unfolded slowly. Tall trees, long shadows, houses few and far between. No cars behind him. No signs of life. The house key was still with him, rusted but intact. When he stopped in front of the old property, the air felt colder. The house's facade was covered in ivy. The roof had been repaired recently, by someone, but the interior seemed untouched. The furniture was all covered with white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be awakened. Eliot stepped in slowly. The sound of wooden floors creaking under his shoes was both familiar and haunting. Each room whispered what it used to be. The kitchen, where his mother baked cakes. The living room, where his father read the newspaper. But it was the basement that made him pause. There, a gate secured with chains. Old locks, but the spare key was still hidden behind the gutter, exactly where it used to be. He unlocked it, descended the stairs in silence, using his phone as a flashlight. The basement was damp. It smelled of mold and soil. But in the back, a blue box caught his attention. An old chest. Locked. He found a crowbar among rusted tools and forced it open until the lid popped with a dry crack. Inside were childhood things. Notebooks, dolls, a broken portable radio. But at the bottom, an envelope with shaky handwriting. It read, Summer of '99, Vivian. Eliot stood frozen for a few seconds. Then he took the envelope. Inside were yellowed pages with handwritten drawings and notes. Fragments of a diary. He got angry at Dad again. Said they were going to stop him from leaving the country. Mom cried afterward, but Eliot didn't see. He never sees. Today the fight was bad. Mom said if he insisted on running away, she'd report everything. Eliot pushed Dad. It wasn't on purpose. But he fell, hit his head on the shelf. Mom panicked. I couldn't move. He ran out, said he was going to get help, but he never came back. He left me here. Mom was still alive, but not for long. Eliot's hands were shaking. The words leapt off the page like screams. Images he didn't remember, but that now began to surface. Fragments of voices, sounds of shouting, his father's red face, his mother's screaming, Vivian standing in the hallway, wide-eyed, blood pooling on the wooden floor. He dropped to his knees. The room spun. Guilt hit him like a punch to the stomach. Reality, or what he thought was reality, was crumbling. It wasn't just an accident. There was a lapse, a trauma, and Eliot, with the help of a family lawyer and a psychiatrist paid dearly, had erased a memory of what had happened that night. Vivian knew. Vivian stayed silent. And now she was making him remember. He stumbled out of the basement, threw up in the yard. The afternoon breeze seemed to mock him, so calm, so intact, as if nothing had ever happened there. But there was more. By the front door, Eliot noticed fresh tire marks, disturbed earth, as if someone had visited the house before him. Lorraine? Vivian wasn't in a coma. Vivian was awake, and more than that, she had been performing flawlessly to force him back here, to make him face what he chose to forget, everything he buried. And now he understood the game. She didn't want revenge. She wanted him to see himself for what he had really been, and to forgive himself or not. As Eliot got in his car, something caught his eye in the rearview mirror. A woman standing between the pine trees, dressed in white, motionless. Vivian? No, it was a nurse. Lorraine. She was there, watching. No car, no footprints leading in. Eliot jumped out of the car, ran to where she stood. But she was gone. On the ground, only a fallen leaf, a piece of paper, a note in Vivian's handwriting. You can't bury what still breathes. That night was the worst of Eliot Dawson's life. Not even the first weeks after his parents' death had hurt this much. Not the silent judgments whispered through the halls of the family company. Not Vivian's distant glances over the years, always cold, as if she saw something in him that he couldn't see in himself. But now he saw, and he remembered. He remembered his mother's scream, the dull thud of his father's head against the bookcase, the shallow breaths, the blood soaking the flowery carpet in the living room, and most of all, Vivian's paralyzed gaze begging him to stay. But he ran, got into the car, sped off, and left everything behind, left it to be handled by others, left it to be forgotten. And now, she was awake, forcing him to relive every step. But something else was even more disturbing. Lorraine, the nurse who had whispered the truth, who had appeared in the rear-view mirror between the pines by the lake house, though there had been no path, no car, no explanation. Eliot needed to understand who she was. The next morning, he returned to the hospital, determined to confront her. But Lorraine wasn't there. She left her shift last night and didn't come back, the supervisor said, barely concealing her discomfort. She turned in her badge, asked for a transfer before even completing a week. Eliot fell silent. He requested the nurse's file, claiming he wanted to thank her for taking care of his sister. The receptionist hesitated, but Eliot Dawson was rich, influential, and very persuasive. Full name, Lorraine Pierce. There wasn't much information. No photo in the system. Just the basics. Age 39. Marital status. Widowed. Minimal hospital experience. Everything very generic, as if she weren't real. That's when Eliot realized something he didn't want to admit. Lorraine had appeared in his life at the exact moment his sister fell into a coma. She had spoken in riddles from the start, as if she were following an invisible script he was only just beginning to read. She just wants you to see, she had said, what you forgot. It was as if Lorraine knew everything before he did. He made up his mind to find her. He used his contacts, paid investigators. One of them brought back information that made Eliot go cold. 20 years ago, there was a nurse named Lorraine Pierce who worked at a private psychiatric clinic in Vermont. She treated patients with severe memory trauma. But she died in 2011. Car accident. Are you sure about the name? Eliot asked, barely whispering. Yes. Buried in the Brattleboro Town Cemetery. Brattleboro was a quiet little town, with tree-lined streets and the mood of late autumn. The cemetery was on a hill, surrounded by golden trees and a low mist that looked like it came out of a nightmare. Eliot found the grave. Lorraine Pierce, 1972 to 2011. Peace comes to those who listen. There it was, the same woman who had looked him in the eyes in the hospital hallway, who had whispered the phrase that started it all, who had appeared between the pines. Dead. But if she was dead, then who, or what, had been at the hospital? As he stared at the headstone, Eliot felt the wind change. Sharp, cutting, He turned, and there, on the other side of the hill, she stood. Lorraine, dressed in white, hair tied back, gaze steady. "Are you a ghost?" Eliot asked, frozen in place. She smiled gently, a smile that didn't confirm nor deny. "Some ghosts live inside us, Mr. Dawson. You locked them away. And now, you must set them free?" Eliot stepped closer, unable to believe what he was doing. Why are you helping me?" "Because she loves you. Even when you disappeared, she loved you. Even when you ran, she didn't hate you. She just wanted you to see." Lorraine stepped even closer, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your mind protected you, numbed you, but she chose to wake you up. And now, it all depends on what you'll do with it." Ellie wanted to ask more, but she vanished like smoke, as if she had never been there. Back in the car, Elliot's phone was vibrating incessantly. An anonymous message, an encrypted link. When he opened it, a video began to load. It was the hospital room. Vivian lying still. But in the next minute, she opened her eyes. She sat up slowly, removed the wires, looked straight into the camera, a camera she had clearly set up herself. "If you're seeing this, Eliot, it means you remembered. I didn't want you to suffer, but I also couldn't keep watching you live a lie. Mom died in my arms. So did Dad. And I was left alone, waiting for you to come back. But you ran, like you always did." She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with pain and tenderness. "I rehearsed this coma, not to punish you, but to bring you back, to that summer, to the place where everything stopped. Now it's up to you. Will you run again?" She lay back down, closed her eyes, returned to her previous position. End of video. Eliot didn't know whether to cry or scream. Vivian was not in a coma. Lorraine was, or wasn't, a presence beyond life. But the truth was finally right in front of him, and it was unbearable. The past, the one he tried to bury, was still breathing, and it was about to suffocate him unless he made a choice. Night had fallen when Eliot returned to the hospital, but he was no longer the same man who had entered days before with a recorder hidden in his pocket. Now he carried the truth in his chest and the weight of 2 decades of running. That sterile white building, once a symbol of silence and mystery, now seemed like a stage set, ready to reveal its final curtain. He went straight up to the ICU floor. The nurses exchanged glances as he passed. No one stopped him. At the end of the hallway, room 214, where she was. "Vivian." He placed his hand on the doorknob, but hesitated. What if it was all theater? What if the memory of the basement, the diary, the images, were nothing but a fragile construction of guilt? What if Lorraine had just been a delusion, a product of a mind trying to make sense of trauma by turning it into a mother figure? But then he remembered the video, his sister's voice, her eyes staring into the camera, that sentence that cut like a blade. "Now it's up to you. Are you going to run away again?" He took a deep breath and entered. The room was dark, but not completely. A soft light glowed from the heart monitor, the steady beeping still present. Vivian lying there as always, eyes closed. Eliot approached slowly. For a few seconds, he just watched her, her face, the features so identical to their mother's, the slight twitch in her eyelid. She wasn't in a coma. She was waiting for him. He sat in the chair beside her, gently touched her hand. "I remember," he said, voice hoarse, fragile. I remember everything now, Vivi." Nothing. Silence. Then, very slowly, her eyes opened. There was no shock, no surprise. It was as if she had already known he would come. "Took you long enough," she said, with a sad smile. Eliot felt his stomach twist. "I ran away," he murmured. "I left you there. I knew. Deep down, I always knew, but—" She nodded softly, like someone who had already forgiven long before hearing the apology. "Mom asked me not to hate you," she said. Lying there on the floor, barely breathing, she held my hand and said, "He didn't mean to." Then she closed her eyes. Eliot began to cry. "I should have stayed. I could have helped. I could have—" "Died, too," she interrupted gently. "That wasn't her plan, Eliot. Nor mine." Silence. They looked at each other. For the first time in 20 years. Truly. Vivian slowly sat up, still pale, the machine still connected, but now entirely useless. A disguise. A theater act that was finally ending. After everything happened, I tried to tell you, at the hospital, but you didn't remember. You cried, screamed. Then came the lawyers, the pills, the reports. She averted her gaze, sorrowful. They erased you. I asked to forget, Eliot admitted. I begged the psychiatrist for anything that would wipe it away. I was scared of myself. Vivian didn't respond. She just held his hand. For years, I thought about exposing you, telling everything. But then I saw that what hurt the most was watching you try to live without knowing who you were, like a book with half the pages torn out. She stared at the ceiling for a moment. So I planned everything. The coma, the hospital, the nurse. Eliot interrupted. Lorraine. Vivian smiled softly. Yes, Lorraine. She was real, you know? Took care of me once when I was depressed. She was amazing. Loved psychology. Said sometimes the soul needs to pretend to sleep in order to truly wake up. But she died. I saw her grave. I know. She talked to me? Vivian didn't reply. She simply closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe she came back to finish what she started. Why now, Vivian? Eliot asked. Why make me relive all this after so many years? She leaned in, looked into his eyes. Because now you're old enough to understand what our parents really wanted. And because now you finally stopped running. Silence. The air between them was heavy with memories, yet somehow lighter, as if something was finally dissolving. Eliot held his sister's face. Forgive me. She pressed her forehead to his. I never stopped loving you. He cried, not like a businessman, not like a grown man with a firm voice and a rehearsed smile. He cried like the 18-year-old boy who left his sister behind, who never said goodbye to his mother, who swallowed guilt like poison. Now at last he was awake. Vivian lay back down. She would keep pretending for 1 or 2 more days, just enough for the doctors to believe her condition had improved. Then the miracle recovery would be announced. Life would resume. But for Eliot, nothing would ever be the same again. He promised he would tell the truth, not to the newspapers, but to himself. He would write, document, honor their parents, own what he had done. She simply nodded, smiling. That's already more than I ever hoped for. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. Vivian was closing her eyes again in peace. But this time not to escape, to rest.